Welcome to a Cofi with the FinTech Pod. We'll explore the latest trends, innovations, and ideas shaping the financial industry. Join host Alex Irigoyen as he interviews leading experts in the field. Learn from top CFO, tech leaders, investors, and many more. Join us and get inspired. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Cofi with. Today with us, we have Neal Hartsell. Neal, how are you doing? Welcome.
Good, thank you. It's great to be here.
I much appreciate having you today in here as a guest.
Right.
Awesome. So, Neal, you're the founder and CEO of Mile1 Marketing. It would be great if we can start with an intro of yourself, who you are, what you do, where you're coming from.
Okay, great. Well, so Mile1 Marketing is a business-to-business consulting agency. It's a solopreneur entrepreneur operation. It's just me. I serve cybersecurity and networking startup and early stage companies, which I'll define as revenue of $0 to $20 million. That's kind of my sweet spot. And I typically help companies with any part of marketing strategy or go-to-market strategy, go-to-market execution. And because of the way the world has evolved, digital marketing is a big part of that in this day and age. So that's where I focus my energy and the kind of clients I look for.
That's awesome. And you started your career early on in tech companies. One of the companies where you develop, I assume early on in your career was in Cisco. So I don't know if you can share how did you start and move all the way up to CMO, now to start your own agency. You could share with us that journey.
So I can. I've been at this game for several decades now, so I'm not young. I started my career with Northern Telecom and the public switch telephone network, specifically in the mid-'80s when things were evolving from an analog network to digital. And I fell in love with digital technology pretty early. I then got involved in a bunch of advanced data services. If people are networking geeks, they'll recognize terms like ISDN, frame relay, ATM. These all predated the internet and IP and Ethernet technology, which is so prevalent today. So I spent a lot of years in the networking space. And then in the mid-2000s, I got involved in cybersecurity. And I was the VP of marketing for a company called Tipping Point. And they were one of the first intrusion prevention system companies. And IPSs are pretty well known in the security space. So that was one of my first sort of large VP of marketing CMO type stints. I had a good sized team there, a pretty sizable budget. It was a high growth company, learned a ton. And from there, I moved through a string of startups. We have a lot of startups here in Austin, Texas. My career strategy was always to start with a large company and go to mid-sized company, go to a small company, and then open up my own business. I knew early in life that's what I wanted to do, and that's how I've evolved things. Mm-hmm. Yes, along the way, I was involved in one startup. We were in the ADSL space. It was a company called NetSpeed, and we were acquired by Cisco, and it was a very good acquisition. I got spoiled. I thought this is easy, so I'll just go do it again and again and again. It's not always easy.
Yeah. What made you have so clear that you wanted to start in large companies and then do that process to smaller companies, right? It's not maybe very common.
When I started my career, the world was very different. So in the mid-'80s, you still could go to large companies. I was fresh out of MBA school. I had an undergraduate degree in engineering. And I was hired by Northern Telecom. They sent me one of these 2-year management training programs where there's a lot of movement through different disciplines in the company. They're trying to groom you for larger responsibilities. And I stayed with them for 9 years. But I don't know if that model is so prevalent today. It's much more of a school of hard knocks on the job training game these days. And but my strategy always was to work for a large company because I knew I could get a lot of experience from talented people. You can work with very large customers, and I did. But I always wanted to run the show. And I really knew that I had some entrepreneurial spirit, and I never cared how small the business would be. If it was a solopreneur play, that's fine. If it was a hot dog stand, that's fine. But I wanted to do my own thing. And so my strategy was start large, take as much knowledge as I can, move to a mid-sized company, move through startups, and then end my career by doing more of my own thing. And that's just the way this worked out. Whether it was a grand strategy or dumb luck, I don't really know. But, but it's worked pretty well.
That's awesome. And how do you exactly, Neal, help companies at Mile1? Because you have this experience, right, from all type of companies. Now you get in the hands of early stage startups. So how is that work with you working directly with the founders? I don't know if you could share some more about it.
So it's interesting. Whenever someone has a marketing problem, it almost always comes down to we're not getting enough qualified leads.
Yeah.
The sales pipe is not as thick as we want it to be, and things aren't moving quickly enough. We're not making revenue.
Yeah.
That's almost always where the discussion starts. Now, in the world of marketing, and the reason I named my company Mile1 Marketing is, it's going to be a journey to fix this problem. And I view it, I love sports. I view it as, if you run a race or have a cycling race, that first mile is the most important part of the race. If you get through the first mile, you probably have done all the right preparatory things. So what I often find when a company says we're not getting enough leads, it almost always traces back to the earliest things you need to do in marketing. And they come down to, you really need to understand your target buyer very well, the ICP, ideal customer profile, as we call it. You really need to understand the buyer personas inside of that ICP, what motivates them to solve, what problems they're encountering and what solutions they think about. Clearly, you need to know something about competitive landscape, market size, what your solution is, what your value proposition is, what is the pain you solve for. Those things all will lead to some kind of a position. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why nature will allow you to exist or not. You don't always have to be the biggest. There are many niche players in a given industry, but you're either going to be number one, number two, or a niche. And that's kind of the way all industries ultimately structure out. So I think you really have to understand what is your position, what's different and special about your company. Mm-hmm. And once you can nail that down in crisp terms, I believe you're in the best position to establish what your message to the marketplace will be and how you will brand yourself. Once you've solved that domino, which is also an early race need, I think you're in a really strong position to then go into digital marketing and get your expression correct, your story correct, through your website, your collateral, your campaigns, your social media efforts, how you tell your story to the people that you want to hear that. What I often find is when a young company wants to get started in marketing, they want to jump into that third rung as quickly as possible. Yeah. And if you haven't done the positioning and messaging homework, you're going to make a lot of expensive mistakes. Mm-hmm. So it's better to get your first mile right.
Yeah. I feel like many cases the founders, they want to jump into help in marketing and see the results as fast as possible, right? Without kind of wanting to do that previous work as in detail as possible, right? But
I've seen this story so many times where early in clients, I'll often say, we need to get marketing plan written down. Mm-hmm. And I think what the buyer hears is, oh my gosh, this is going to be a 50-page science project and it's just going to be very theoretical. No, it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
You can write a very effective marketing plan in 3 or 4 or 5 pages. But if you don't write that down, you probably don't have clarity of thought around who you serve, the problem you solve, what's the pain that's going to go away if you solve that problem, how are you different and better. If you can really write those things down on the back of a napkin and it sort of holds together, I think you're in the best position to then hire marketing people to go do all of the very specific functional things to get that done. If you don't write these things down, they're going to flounder, and it's going to be expensive and frustrating. Everybody wants more leads, and they all want them now.
Yeah.
But the path to success is to get the fundamentals right.
Yeah. And for example, I assume in many cases working with startups, you define a ICP, right? But that can change, or that could change during the time, right? So does it happen that sometimes you define that ICP, then go to those digital marketing channels, probably it doesn't work as well as expected, need to go back again to the initial process, or how?
It is iterative, because we all think that we know exactly who our buyer is and who the ideal buyer for our solution is. But what you often find is you establish some profile. You say, hey, we're going after mid-sized businesses who have a financial systems problem. Okay, that's in one sense, that's a pretty specific statement. In another sense, it's still very, very broad.
Yeah.
And so the more you engage with prospects and ultimately customers, the more you'll find the nuances that define why your solution was the best fit for them. And then you can tighten the aperture of your real ICP definition. Because the worst kind of leads are general leads that don't convert. That's a waste of time, energy, money. It's much, much better to have an extremely targeted, buyer, because you can message to them very specifically. And the only people who care about your story are people who fit that profile. That's a lot less expensive way of going about. It's the same thing with fishing, right?
Yeah.
You can throw a net, you're going to catch a garden variety of stuff, including, car tires. Or you can put a very specific hook with a very specific bait in a very specific locale of water, and you're more likely to catch a particular tuna.
Yeah. I think one of the keys probably is like being able to iterate as fast as possible and with less resources, or as cheap as possible. What will be like the techniques that you will say, okay, we have this hypothesis, we think that our ideal customer is this type. Okay, let's go and try to test that quickly to see if there's a response or there's engagement. Like, what would be those techniques to iterate fast?
Well, depending on how much time, energy, money you want to devote to that, you could do something as guerrilla as ask surveys on LinkedIn to a targeted audience. If you have more time, more money, then focus groups are sort of at the other end of the spectrum. Well, it takes longer to effectively organize and put together focus groups and have the level of interaction to really tease out, what's important to those buyers. Obviously, LinkedIn surveys, you've probably seen many of them, they're usually 1 or 2 questions. They're very, very targeted, very specific. So these are ends of a spectrum, right? One is more holistic, it's going to tell you more, but it takes longer to achieve. If you don't have time, you got to be very aggressive and sort of find a channel, find a way to target the profile as best you can, and begin communicating with them, and they will ultimately tell you what you want to know. Even if it's that your target audience is not responding to your content at all, that's telling you something.
Yeah.
You didn't put the right content out there, or it's the wrong ICP that you've identified, or it's the right content, but it's the wrong message. Your hook was not working. So the more you engage, the more you're likely to eventually hit a vein and find something that works, right? And by definition, eliminate a lot of veins that don't work.
Yeah, absolutely. As for B2B marketing nowadays, we're talking about LinkedIn. Would you say that it's the main channel or the place to be these days for B2B SaaS or B2B tech in general?
It's certainly one of the top ones at the moment. That's driven by, I think, a couple of factors. If you were to roll the clock back a few years ago, Facebook might have been the dominant one, even for B2B, certainly more so for B2C. But for cost reasons and a lot of political reasons and privacy reasons, it's I think less of an interesting platform now. LinkedIn a few years ago was much more of a resume exchange site. Wasn't too many years ago. That's, I think, how most professionals thought of LinkedIn. It was a place to stay in touch with people that might give you a job. Right? And now I think it's much more of a content exchange platform. It is a platform where people go to learn about a particular field. And there's good and bad to that. The good news is you can get very targeted audiences in the B2B space. That's the good news. The bad news is it's not a fantastic lead gen platform. It's a fantastic awareness platform. So you have to be careful about your expectations of LinkedIn. But I believe that when marketing's really doing its job well, it is doing demand creation, and that is helping people to understand about a problem that they may not know they have. You're educating them about a problem. Does that mean they're going to be a buyer this quarter? Probably not. But they might be a buyer in a year. And if you haven't been educating them with your brand, when they turn to a buyer, you're not going to be in consideration. So the game has changed. Social media is way more important now because we all trust the advice of people that we know more than we trust the direct message from a vendor.
Yeah, for sure.
And so social media in its best form is extremely useful for that reason. Obviously, this is about a lot of bad forms of social media, but in the business world, I think it's still a relatively clean platform. Now, it's not the only platform. Surprisingly, I think more businesses are looking at taking a hard look at TikTok now.
Really?
Because it's short form content that has just so many eyeballs. It's not a platform that I use for reasons of I just don't care to participate in the TikTok game.
Yeah.
But I think it is one of the up and coming platforms where B2B content exchange is going to happen.
Yeah. And how do you target in a platform like TikTok your B2B prospects?
Well, I haven't spent any time there, so I don't know if it has the same robust capabilities of targeting that Facebook and LinkedIn have. I think my impression is it's much more influencer driven right now, and less sort of algorithmically tuned driven.
Yeah,
I think they're not that far along there. So, but I'm sure that's coming. We've seen the same thing happen in Reddit, for example. No one would have advertised. Well, I shouldn't say no one. Most people would not have advertised on Reddit just a few years ago. And now you're starting to see more advertising on Reddit. And what does that mean? Well, a few years ago, their ability to help you dial in a specific target was pretty poor.
Yeah.
So you would have spent a lot of money, and you might as well have been spending it on TV ads, zero targeting. Well, not zero, but low targeting. But that's changed. Reddit has become more sophisticated. So TikTok will go through that evolution. I don't think it's there yet.
That's awesome. And how do you see, for example, the evolution a few years ago in terms of the messaging positioning of the B2B companies comparing to nowadays? I kind of feel that it feels more of a B2C atmosphere in the B2B compared to the previous years. I don't know if it's just me guessing that, but it's kind of the feeling that I have whenever I have the ads running in front of me. Sometimes it feels like a much of a B2C ad comparing to a B2B. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a great question. I think two things come to mind for me. Number one, everyone is so extraordinarily overwhelmed with information. And when this is the case, whoever can have the crispest message that cuts through the noise wins. And consumer marketers are excellent at this. And so I think many B2B approaches are taking more pages from the B2C world because it's very highly advanced. Even if you have a very technical product, if you can't explain it in quick, easy to digest terms, it's just a hard sell.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, I think B2B is becoming more like B2C in terms of how it goes to market with its branding and messaging.
Also, it seems like you go directly, you know exactly who the buyer is in terms of you have the name, surname, company, everything perfectly target. So it's kind of at the end of the day, even though you are B2B or B2C, you're talking to that person, which is a C, right? Which is a individual, right?
We have the ability through technology to target so much better than we could have just a few years ago. And by definition, if you're going to have a narrow target, it's because you know enough about them to speak in pretty particular terms. So that is way advanced beyond where it was just a few years ago. But I think the big change from a few years ago, and let's define that as this is 2023, let's say pre-pandemic. So let's go back to 2019, call that 4 years ago. The power of social media for B2B was not nearly what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Marketers were still more focused on, let me do sort of spray and pray outbound campaigns to drag people to my website.
Yeah.
And let me force them to fill out a form, and then I own them and I'm going to badger them until they purchase something. That's not the model today. It pretty much doesn't work. The model today is the prospect has the power, the marketer does not have the power. So you have to go to the watering hole where the prospect is. People just aren't going to come to your website. They hang out on LinkedIn, or they hang out on Twitter, or they hang out on TikTok. They hang out in Slack channels where birds of feather people gather and talk about their particular profession or topic of interest. They do the same thing on Reddit. So these are communities of people who are talking amongst themselves. And in those conversations,
Mm-hmm.
they're discussing the products or services that are solving their problems. They're getting references from each other. They're talking about vendors or solutions that they don't like, and they're expressing why they don't like them. They're expressing their views on review sites like G2 or Trust Radius. So the buyer has the power now, because it's easy for me to call somebody I know and say, do you like this brand of car?
Yeah.
I had a terrible experience with it. I would never buy it again. I don't need to go to the dealer or sort of a car club. I can get that so much more directly. Very much the case in B2B now. So if you're not marketing with content that's useful to people in their peer-to-peer discussions, if you think they're just going to come to your site because they saw an ad, it's less and less likely that buyers are operating that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big shift, I think, in just a few years.
Absolutely. And also, having in mind the current situation, the current crisis situation, I've heard from other founders, CFOs, right, that the CAC is going up, right? The number of leads that they have in the pipeline is drying. Budgets are definitely being cut. What do you suggest for B2B marketers, CFOs, founders, CEOs, right, to to do in a situation like this, right? For example, let's take a company that eventually sees that CAC is going up, the number of the pipeline is drying. What would you suggest as first things to analyze or first things to do?
Well, so customer acquisition cost is and that's a big topic, and there's sort of two things you can do. One is lower your own cost of acquisition by using technology, and I think artificial intelligence is changing the game in a big way. We could have an entire discussion just on that topic. But just because budgets are tighter doesn't mean that there's no spend. So I think you just have to shift, your message to things that are maybe more around cost savings or, productivity increases. Maybe it's less about revenue increasing stories right now and more about how you can help your clients save money, save time, save cost and so it's kind of a message shift to appeal to people that their budgets are reduced and they're scrutinizing purchases more, but that doesn't mean they've stopped spending.
Yeah. And in terms of channel, have you seen any specific channel going the price very, very high? Have you seen any opportunity on a channel where probably the prices might have gone down?
In terms of marketing, sending a marketing message? Well, so I have a particular bias here. I'm strongly biased against paid advertising and more for what I'll call, organic advertising. LinkedIn's a perfect example, and I didn't author this. There are others who have said this before me, but the real value of targeted advertising on LinkedIn is just targeting an audience. It's getting to a specific set of people that you want to share a message with. It's really targeted distribution more than it is targeted advertising. So you can buy large numbers of impressions on LinkedIn for not very much money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very different than trying to, purchase leads at, some sort of qualification level at 40, 50, 60, $100 a lead. If you're spending pennies to a few dollars for a large number of impressions, and you're sharing very useful content that causes people to know your brand, appreciate that you're sharing something with them that's useful to them, that I think will lower your customer acquisition cost over time. Does that mean it's going to fill up your funnel in 90 days? Of course not. The old principle is that whatever market you're selling into, a very high percentage of them, maybe 97%, excuse me, are not in a buying motion right now.
Yeah.
If that's true, then the 3% who are searching for your solution on Google, what is the best X, they're in a buying motion. But if you haven't been building a brand awareness and a content exchange with the 97%, and you're focusing all your energy on the 3%, by definition, you lose over time.
Yeah.
So you have to market. And these social media platforms and impression-based content sharing is a very inexpensive way to get to those people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of, I think, how you have to manage your customer acquisition cost. Drive it more around brand and useful content and less around purchased leads, which are very expensive and are very unlikely to convert as quickly as you think they will.
Yeah.
Which drives up your CAC.
Yeah, but you have to be kind of doing both simultaneously.
There's a balance.
Right? You want to be in the...
You want to be in both. No one would advocate, certainly I wouldn't advocate, don't spend any money on, demand, generation. Spend it all on demand creation. But balance your portfolio accordingly. If someone is searching for, the best software solution for X,
Mm-hmm.
you want to show up in that search, but you want to show up and also your brand is recognizable because they've seen you in other places.
Mm-hmm.
If you show up in the top 10 list and they've never heard of you,
Yeah,
they're more likely to choose one of the other 9 companies who are in the top 10 list that they've heard of.
Yeah. How do you differentiate demand generation and demand creation? One is top of the funnel, the other one bottom of the funnel.
So the big dividing line is demand creation is not, you are speaking to someone who's not currently in a purchase motion. They're in target,
Yeah.
but they're not in a buy cycle right now.
So top of the funnel.
It's more top and middle of funnel.
Okay.
And you can measure this by the questions that people are asking. So if we take the topic of artificial intelligence, someone who's asking a query in a search engine, what is artificial intelligence? They're not buying anything. They're looking to be educated very broadly. Someone who's saying, how can I use artificial intelligence to make my factory software run 20% cheaper? That's much more of a buying motion query. So you need to be able to appeal to both, of course.
Mm-hmm. And Neal, how are you using AI these days for marketing?
Well, I think for all of us, the world changed in November of 2022 because of ChatGPT. It certainly made AI highly accessible. There's not that much that's new, I think, about AI. These large language models and other sort of foundational models have been being used for years. ML, machine learning, is certainly not a new concept.
Yeah.
The accessibility for the masses is what changed in November. And so, I've been involved with companies in the cybersecurity space that have been using machine learning for years, but it wasn't, and there are marketing tools. I mean, Jasper is a well-known content writing tool that uses AI. That's been around for years. That wasn't born in November of last year, but you have to pay to get that. So the way I use AI tools is for content planning. So I use it for idea generation. I use it for some broad sort of topical keyword discovery. Then I go into a more current tool like SEMrush from there. I take source content that I've written and I use ChatGPT to make that content better. It does it fast, it does it cheap, and it's very effective. There's almost no, I use it for demand generation campaigns. Once you've got a good piece of content like a video or a white paper, it's pretty easy to splinter that into multiple other assets using artificial intelligence. You can easily produce downstream blog posts, social media posts, short form video clips. So if you're good at creating long form assets that are organized so that they can be broken up into shorter form assets, both written or video or image, then artificial intelligence can do so much of that work so fast, so cheap now. That's how I tend to use it. I look for ways to replace everything that I do with AI.
Yeah.
But of course there are limits, and you need to be careful. It of course can hallucinate, so you always need to
be careful.
I wouldn't treat anything that it does as a final product. But I really think the greatest value is not in source content creation, because that's going to produce something that's very generic, which doesn't set you apart. I find it to be really, really powerful if you're good at prompting and if you give it source content from which to work. Not intellectual property, of course, but even with ChatGPT, at least in OpenAI's ChatGPT right now, you can turn off there's a button where you can switch it off, and you can put source content, and it will not make that part of the learning model, as we're told, and I will believe that that's true. So there are things you can do there, but it's fantastic. I just treat it like a free employee. It's not free, $20 a month, but that's a cheap employee.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Awesome. Last question, Neal. If you will have to give an advice to young people starting their career now in marketing, that they want to start their career, what will be the skill set that you will suggest them to learn to start now a marketing career?
Well, I always will believe that it's a mix of creativity and analytics. So, for me, again, I have an engineering background, pretty analytical. I love numbers. I love problem solving. I love putting things together, taking things apart, figuring out how something works. I love process. So these are all sort of just important for me. I've felt that way since I was a child. The creative side is important too. And, everyone is creative. People say I'm not. That's not true. Some people are better at writing. Some people are better at music. Some people are better at, they're gifted at speaking. So you have to find the place where your creativity can come out and then turn that into a way to express the story of the company. Some people are great on camera. Some people are great with the written word. There's a whole spectrum in between. But I think marketing now is far more data-driven and far more analytical than it was a few years ago. That's only going to increase, especially because of artificial intelligence. So you have to be good at the analytical side of things. But in the end, it's the creative spark that allows you to connect with another human that's potentially a buyer that is probably the real difference maker. And you need some of both. And none of us are on the same place on that spectrum, but get as much experience on both those fronts as possible. And learn how to use advanced tooling. I think it's been said in many other markets, and it's certainly, or any other professions, it's certainly true in marketing. I don't think you will lose your job to AI.
Yeah.
I think a person who doesn't use AI loses their job to someone who does.
Yeah. I think it's in marketing, the creative side that it makes you the difference, right? But definitely nowadays you have to measure that. If you're not measuring it, you're out. So it's kind
Sooner or
of
later, the CFO is going to come knocking.
Yeah, for sure.
And it needs to have an ROI.
Absolutely. Awesome, Neal. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Alex.
And thank you for sharing all these learnings with us.
I've enjoyed it. Glad to share.
Awesome. Thank you.